This is the July meeting of the Mobility and Transportation Infrastructure Commission. And would like to have roll call. Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here.
Okay, thank you. The only action item we have today is approval of the minutes.
We have
But-
to do the pledge.
Thank you. Okay, I'll get to that in a minute. I'd like to ask Commissioner Dunlap to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Chair. Please stand if you're able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Dunlap. Now's the time for public comment. Do we have anyone in the public that would like to speak to a matter that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, public comment is closed. For our items today, for the 2 hours that we have here, I'd like to reserve the bulk of that time to item number 3, review of Meridian traffic data and analysis. Excuse me, and reserve at least an hour for that and try to get through the other items as quickly as we can, if it is the will of the commission. At this point, we'll go to item number 2, project status update. And Director Gerber, please highlight, if you will, any significant changes in the status from the prior meeting.
Of course. Thank you, Chair Fisher, and good evening, commissioners. So you'll notice that we're light on updates for this month. It's been a very busy month coming off of our budget adoption and moving into making the necessary resource additions we have been working on in the department to move forward a lot of these projects. We have a big item coming up tomorrow at the city council meeting. It might be pushed back a week or so to a special meeting. We're talking about that today because the city council agenda, well, I should take one step back. Our city council agenda tomorrow night is our first agenda of the month and our last regularly scheduled meeting until mid-August. So it actually got quite full of items across the city in addition to about 5 public works items. And our big item was one we've been talking about in this commission for a little while, which is bringing on several dozen on-call professional services to help us move forward with a lot of the projects that are on the project list that you see in the status update. So our staff has been spending quite a bit of time this last month looking through the 66 proposals that we got for various different types of public works disciplines. We had about 3,500 pages in total of proposals to review across our entire staff. And so we're hoping as soon as we can execute those master service agreements with the council, we actually have a slew of task orders we're going to implement right away, which cover a lot of the projects that you see on the status list. So that's some of those items there. The other big news is that we did finalize some hires. We still have quite a few left to do that are in recruitment. We hired a senior civil engineer. Her name is Hasmi Korkus. She couldn't join us tonight, but you'll certainly see her at a future commission meeting, and she'll be introduced at the city council meeting tomorrow night. We just extended an offer to a civil engineering assistant, and we're hoping that that person takes us up on that offer and joins our staff. And then we have active recruitments for our management analyst positions and an intern position as well to fill. And then we have a few other recruitments that will start in August, including our transportation position that was budgeted by the city council, but hasn't been approved. The job description hasn't been approved by the council just yet. So as far as projects that we can update their status on, we had a couple interesting things happen this month. We attended remotely the California Transportation Commission meeting that was had the freeway stub relinquishment item on it. We provided a written comment, we provided a verbal comment, and the item was successful. There was some confusion among the commission about the item in terms of how ownership works, how operations will move forward. But ultimately, the discussion led to that this was the very first step in order for those other questions to be answered. And so we were supportive on that item, and we're continuing to work with Pasadena on the transitional upcoming projects that we've talked about in this commission previously. We're also close to wrapping up our,
Herbert, can I ask
oh,
a quick question? Chair?
of course.
When they talk about that and the stub, I know they've, in the news, talking about the development and recreation facility, all different things. Is there mention at all of reconfiguring the actual off ramps themselves, the Del Mar, the St. Joseph? Is that ever considered? At one point, there was thoughts of being able to take that and take it over and cut through and get it to Fair Oaks to get to a stronger corridor, as opposed to the configuration. I mean, is that part of the discussion as part of the rethinking that actual? I know we have to consider flow through and traffic as part of the plan. That's mandated. But I'm wondering if that's been part of the discussion, how to reconfigure that for better mobility.
It will be. It hasn't been part of the immediate discussion. The very, very immediate discussion is focused on what they call transitional projects, which are these straightforward, well, not straightforward, but simpler in scope projects through the corridor to reconfigure the non-freeway streets like Pasadena Avenue, for example. And so that's the projects that, and our Columbia Street project that originated in the commission is part of that transitional project group. That's the first step. The next step would be part of this revisioning of the land area. And that would include reconfiguration of the ramps themselves. And the scope of the analysis was limited to that to date because of a desire to focus on transitioning those ramps out of Caltrans's hands and into the city's hands without looking too much farther towards what would happen in the remainder of Pasadena outside of the boundary of the Caltrans property. The part you're talking about would actually go hand in hand with that revisioning process, but they haven't floated any, at least publicly or to us, any ideas just yet on how that would work, other than some of the, early action projects that were imagined a few years back. There's nothing recent about that level of renewal. It's really focused on just the deconstruction or reconfiguration of the ramps themselves.
Because, correct me, I think my fellow commissioners might remember when they were putting in 2017 the plans for Metro. Pasadena and the consultant was talking about that effort potentially as before they relinquished to reconfigure that section and be able to try to divert more traffic and reconfigure to go to Fair Oaks and such. So it goes back, a ways too as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the regional goal. It's just a slow process forward. And in fact, the other item I was going to update on is our Fair Oaks fiber ITS early phase project. So we've talked about this, at least our team has talked with Pasadena's Department of Transportation about this many times. There's just not much we can do until more, we get farther down the road. We want to make sure we're kind of a broken record in what our vision is for Fair Oaks with Pasadena, but there's no motion so far until they can figure out this revisioning process for the freeway.
Thank you.
Sure. The other item I was going to mention as a significant update is our work on the fiber optic installation, which is almost complete. Our team receives training, our initial training on the ITS software system that will be used to manage that signal infrastructure. And then we also held a meeting with Metro about tying that fiber hardware system into their bus signal prioritization system, so that when the timing is updated on those signals in the second phase of the project, there will also be a transit benefit to that synchronization along the Fair Oaks corridor.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Director Gerber? We'll start from the left.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bell.
Just one question. Sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot. As far as the contract goes for the on-call services, how many consultants again? And do you know the capacity or the estimated capacity?
Well, we have about 60 consultants, and that's across all different areas of public works. But as far as capacity,
Like is it up to a certain amount? Like up to $6 million, up to $10 million?
sure. So the master service agreements themselves, we're not putting a contract value on. We're actually putting them into the task orders. So as far as our operating budget goes, we have about $600,000 to use across our department for professional services. That doesn't include any money that we could use from our capital improvement budget. The capital improvement budget is a little harder to scope because some of that money is very specifically identified for design or construction. And some of the work we'll be doing with these consultants would be more in the feasibility, constructability area, which we don't necessarily have grant funding for. But then again, we do have a significant, a healthy amount of general fund money that we have free reign to spend as long as we're within the guidelines of the projects that we established in our CAP. So yeah, at least 600,000 for the fiscal year for that set of consultants.
And what's the term of the contract?
So we're setting the term for 3 years with a 2-year
Extension.
options to extend for 2 years beyond that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Abelson.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair Fisher. Ted, just a few specific questions just for clarification. So, street improvements, it says updated status. I didn't detect any update. I'm happy to hear if there is one, but I just wanted to
Sure.
check.
I did notice after published, we made a couple mistakes on the update status, no update status.
Okay.
That might have been one of them. Because we might have tweaked the wording, but I didn't actually have an update. I think the only update there as far as the street resurfacing work goes is that we submitted our road maintenance rehabilitation request to the state. They asked for some modification to it, some additional information about scheduling. So we provided that, and it seems to be accepted. Beyond that, we haven't done any work other than the progression of the existing design work that was already underway with our consultant. Our next step there is when we bring our on-call on board is to identify the priority utility lines that that are in the worst condition so that we can set up our next design package to issue while we wait for our current design package to be complete and move that on to bidding and construction. So no significant change since last month, other than the logistics of getting the consulting on board and then also finalizing the submittal for the state grant funding.
Okay, so those existing projects that we had heard were about 60% or so design, is that still where we are, or have they?
Yeah, I
got
mean,
further?
they're working on that. We really only have milestones at 60% and then at 90%. So yeah, I don't think we have any update in that regard, but that team is still working on that design.
Okay, and that's an outside.
Yeah,
contract.
that's RKA is our consultant for that.
Okay, great. Then further down that page, Columbia Avenue striping and signal improvements. Just checking to see if you had communicated to the city of Pasadena the suggestion
About the
regarding
edge line on
striping
the,
on north and south sides, not just.
yeah, we did make that suggestion. We haven't touched base on it since that time, but yeah, then it's just gonna be a matter of who implements the edge striping, whether it's them or us. It'd likely be them, but we just have to finalize that
But
design with them.
we've told them that that's
Yes,
something. Okay,
yeah.
great, thank you. Just a couple more. I think I'm gonna get the same answer for this one as the first. So Fair Oaks, SR 110, interchange loop, etc. It says updated status and refers to,
Yeah, that's the other
Same deal.
mistake, that there's a no updated status on that, other than for the design, for the on-call package. We have a couple of the vendors that applied for our sort of transportation overarching discipline. We included specific language about highway design experience, so that we could tag in one of those consultants specifically for that project. So one of our initial task orders that we include in the staff report that will go to council either tomorrow night or next Wednesday specifically calls out that work that would start the feasibility work that would start with that design, with that vendor, as soon as we get that contract in place.
okay, great. And just one more, measure our projects. So that's page 6 towards the bottom. You say that staff recently discussed the project with Metro and confirmed that the city's measure our appropriation is split between the interchange / ramp project, which absolutely. And then you say Fremont Huntington Mobility Active Transportation Project. So my understanding was, so the measure our projects total around 80 million round figures. And that 70 million or so was for the interchange and the ramp and such. And that there was another 10 million for what was called regional traffic corridor projects, which included things like I'll be politic when I say adjustment of bulb outs at certain intersections and a variety of other things along Fair Oaks and some other corridors. But this says something different than that.
Yes, so you're correct there. So this took a little bit of unraveling to understand what was going on. We did a little bit of it during the budget process. And then we did a little bit of it through conversation with Metro. So the Measure M money, as you said, it's about 80 million in total. And so there was two phases or passes of appropriation as far as Metro was concerned. One was part of the freeway project. I think it was like 32 million or something like that for either the loop ramp / what used to be the hook ramp. And then the second pass appropriated the other 38 million to the rest of that project. And then the 10 million specifically to the Huntington Fremont project. There was a number of other projects that were listed in the paperwork, but none of them were allocated any funding. And that included all of the other Measure R early action projects. There was a list of projects that you're referring
Right.
to.
And they
Yeah,
were separated by priority. Right?
exactly.
My
So
understanding is what was funded was priority one, which was the interchange and then the corridor improvements. I don't know what the Fremont Huntington Mobility Active Transportation Project is, other than the $6 million grant project,
Yeah,
which is separate.
it is separate. And again, this was a bunch of unraveling with two different sections of Metro. One section was dealing with the $6 million, didn't have knowledge of the other section that was dealing with the $10 million from the Measure R funding. So we have mostly unraveled the issues surrounding the $6 million, and we redrafted the funding agreement and getting it signed right now to secure that $6 million. The $10 million is a little trickier.
And I didn't
And-
mean to put you on.
Yeah,
the
no,
spot,
I'm glad you brought it up because
And we can talk offline
Sure, sure.
further later. It sort of concerned me when I said.
yeah, it is a little concerning. Our thoughts is that we haven't gotten this far yet, but there's an opportunity now with Metro to reprogram that $10 million. Not necessarily that we would do that, but with the changes that Metro is undergoing, where they've sort of, I don't just want to say that they've restructured, but that's not what I'm trying to say. They've sort of recalibrated how you can spend that money. We may have an opportunity to sort of a petition to have it reconfigured. And so we have a lot of things on the table, obviously, that could go for, including a lot of those other early action projects that were initially listed in that Measure R priority list. And so our strategy here was actually when we bring on this on-call consultant who we are specifically directing this to someone who specializes in active transportation work. We want to see what the reasonable costs to make the improvements along Fremont and possibly Huntington would be, so that we can understand how much, if any, of that money can possibly be reappropriated to the other priorities in the early action project list, or some other, transportation priority in the city.
Okay.
So we've had that very cursory conversation with Metro, but we haven't wanted to confirm anything, because that means then we have to commit to like spending the money and then reprogram it. So we're kind of like just trying to figure it out fast, because they're waiting on us a little bit to say, well, what are you doing with your Measure R money? So at the moment, there's already a funding agreement in place for 1.1 million of that 10 million towards the Fremont Huntington project. But I think it's fairly straightforward to reappropriate that. Now, everything I'm saying is extremely confusing. And if you don't know the history, it's very hard to follow. A lot of us are sort of talking about this like we've been talking about for a while. But in general terms, the city has a lot of money appropriated to it from this Measure M active transportation money, which isn't going anywhere. It's dedicated to Fremont/Huntington project. The Measure R money is also been sort of at a high level appropriated, but we can still do something with it. And that's what we're trying to figure out next.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Chair.
Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dovetailing off the last comment, do we have concerns about losing any of the funding that's been earmarked for Metro? Because, we're going back 5 years from our original submissions. And then, between the M and R money, to make sure that we don't get shortchanged, and that we also look at, as you're saying, the corridor and what we need to do, because going back to part of Fremont was to have traffic condition transportation signage, and whether that's still feasible in the plan, and whether we, the spending for that, if we need $10 million, or as you say, to really get traffic moving and get things going. Because
Sure.
here is that we've been we're 5 years in. Yes, we've had pandemic, but we need to get moving on a lot of this.
I should have mentioned, I meant to on Commissioner Abelson's comment. He had mentioned the sort of synchronization along Fair Oaks. As of 2020, that project is going to be paid for by the Rogan funds, not the Measure R funds. And so that's another $10 million on top of the 10 million we're talking about for Measure R money. So as far as losing money, we're not too concerned about that. We're trying to move and make sure this works. The first priority was rescheduling the $6 million Measure M Fremont Huntington money so that that wouldn't expire. So we did that. That agreement has to be signed, but that basically the money starts now, July 2022, and we have a little over 3 years to spend that. And so that's what we're trying to start right away. And that's been sort of rescheduled. So that one's fairly secure. And for as far as the money being now and in the future, the Measure R money is sort of in the past and has to be brought back to now. And so I wouldn't say we're at risk of losing it, but we really should get it figured out and programmed.
I just want to be careful because we had the issues with the SB1 money.
Yes, the SB1 money has a lot more stringent eligibility and spending requirements than any of this money does, because a lot of this money you can almost think of as sort of like special allocations for things that happen over the years, whereas the SB1 money is the same for every city and every city has the same requirements. So it's a little more difficult, or it's a little more, it's easier to lose the SB1 money.
Couple questions. One on the slurry, because we were going to potentially look at a list of potential slurry projects as part of the street improvement. Is that still coming at some point?
Yes, we haven't gotten there yet, but that is still coming.
And then the other is, as I was looking at the slow streets, there were two things. One, the meeting that you mentioned to businesses, which is the day after tomorrow. How much notice has been given for the businesses to know about this and the general public to know about this?
I don't think it's a general public meeting. There will be plenty of general public meetings about this. This was an effort initiated by the city manager's office, and they have had notice. It's already been in talks for a little while. And so when after MTech had provided a recommendation on how that slow streets program should look, we got together with the city manager's office and community development to make sure that this tied in with all the city's economic development goals. And so one thought was, since the recommendation was for this to occur over the holiday season, let's have a frank discussion with the mission businesses about whether this makes sense. We all thought it was a great idea, and that's the perspective we're approaching the group with. But of course, we want to make sure everyone's on board before we just bring this to council, lay out a schedule, appropriate the money, and then go forward. So instead of bringing that to council this month, we decided to have that meeting, get a little additional feedback, and then we can go to council. Our plan is in August, during the mid-August meeting, to execute the contract with our existing design team, with both MTech's recommendation and then whatever additional information we get from the mission businesses, and then hopefully everyone's on the same page as we move forward. That's the idea anyway.
So I'm assuming we reached out to the chamber or the
Yeah, I mean, our team,
manager's office did, I would.
yeah,
assume.
our team didn't, but it was managed to the city manager's office.
And then I believe, correct me, but when did the K-Rails contract? 'Cause I know we were coming up, but I know it got renewed, but I want to make sure we're not, because that was part of all of
Sure,
this.
yeah, that
that we're
expires.
still covered.
Yeah, we're close. That expires on August 19th. We're hoping to renew that contract at the next council meeting, August 17th. So it's a close call, but we're not too concerned about, it's not like the K-Rail is going to disappear that day. We're just trying to get the contractual details wrapped up.
But just so that we need to keep tabs because of the community and the protection and everything to keep in place. while we
Exactly.
Segue to the slow streaks.
Exactly. So our intent
Element.
was to go to a month-to-month rental until we can decide what to do about them under the Slow Streets program. So there's a lot of connected components here.
And the last thing was, at some point, I know we had talked about your project update list. If we could have a column for money so that we're clear whether it's budgeted, covered, which budget, which fund, grant, what have you. So it's easy to know where we are financially.
Sure, I didn't remember that detail, so thank you. Well, we can, that's fairly straightforward. What we can do is maybe that's best served under the the CIP project list versus the operating project list, because the operating work comes out of like one big pool out of our budget, but we could certainly identify that for the CIP
I
projects.
think it's just also good to know because, we've got, as we're looking for grants, as we're looking for other funding sources and where we know like, okay, what's we going to cover with SB1? What are we covering with the Rogan funds? What are we covering with Measure M? What are we covering with Measure R? So that it's really clear and we kind of know and
That's a
we
good point.
anticipate, some issues where we might want to follow up and make sure that everything's buttoned up and, as you say, deadlines, signing contracts, task orders, those kind of things that were clear.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We can, maybe not a column because of the size of the report, but definitely within each item, we can identify the budget.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my question.
I had just one question on the top of page 5, Ramona Avenue, et cetera. Have you contacted the high school yet to let them know when you're going to put in the
Yeah,
student loading zone?
I just recently reached out to high school, haven't connected yet. But our goal is to implement that as soon as possible before the school year begins. As I had mentioned in our last meeting, we were just simply trying to coordinate the work with the high school so they were aware of what we were doing. But yeah, our full intention is to move forward with the recommendations.
And do you know when the school semester begins?
My understanding is it starts at the end of August. No? Okay.
Usually the middle of August, around the 17th.
Okay,
At
so we'll
latest.
probably be very tight in terms of getting this done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for Public Works Director? Okay, seeing none, we'll close this item. Thank you. And we'll go to item number 3, review of the Meridian traffic data and analysis.
Thank you, Chair Fisher. So let me start by saying that we've had a lot of priorities this month, but we're very much committed to sticking to the work plan schedule that we set up, and that the work plan that was adopted last commission meeting. And one of the reasons that we put this item at the top of our year was because of the community importance and the emphasis that MTech had put on this to get this conversation going. So we released this report late. We weren't able to release it till yesterday. We were actually working on this item over the weekend along with a bunch of other priorities. But the intent of this item is not to make an actionable recommendation to you tonight. It's been, from what I understand, close to a year since this commission's had discussions about some of the Meridian intersections. So really what we wanted to do is reopen the item, bringing forth all of the information that our current staff have, walk you through it, garner some discussion, collect some feedback. And then, of course, we want to promote feedback from the community through this forum and also through discussions with residents who have contacted us and getting some feedback from them. And so, I'm probably stumbling a little bit through this, but the idea here is that we sort of restart this discussion, hear your thoughts on it. Once we provide you some additional information, you may have some guidance or recommendations of your own that we can further and look into, and then come back with some recommendations on what to do in the interim and then perhaps the long term. So with that said, the packet that we released was a long packet, but part of it was the status report that we just went over. There's a small section, which is this actual textual staff report. And then there was a large attachment, and all that attachment is the former traffic impact analysis that was done a couple of years ago that this commission I understand probably reviewed in 2020 and 2021. So given that's our part of our knowledge base on Meridian Avenue, we wanted to include that for reference. There's no, there's no reference to that in the staff report as far as a recommendation goes. It's just we're including that as a reference in terms of the collective information we have. So what we have in the report is we collected collision data from the Switter system. We did site visits and took some, performed some measurements using the our aerial photographs about site distance and evaluate those against state standards. And then we have the conclusions from the former 2020 traffic report. So with regard to the collision history, we pulled everything that we could out of Switter's as far back as it goes to 2010 up to about March 2022. And you'll see on one of the attachments here. Liana, can you go down? Oh yeah, perfect. There's a table. You might have to zoom in. It's a little hard to see, but if you're a traffic engineer, you're probably used to seeing sort of like a Switter's output, like a black and red output for each incident. But that's difficult for us to get out of the system. This is basically a database, a table that compiles all that information together. Yeah, it's being shown on the screen that we have here. Oh,
I don't have her.
are the commissioners able to see the screen?
It's coming up.
Liana, can you zoom in on like the left, make like the left-hand side of the screen large? Thank you very much. So what you're seeing here are individual collision records from the Switter system. And what we did was we pulled the data from about the high school area, Bank and Rollin, south along Meridian, and particularly interested in the intersections of Bank, Rollin, and then Oak, Pine, Beach, and Maple. And that's from north heading south. And what you'll see, and I think this also is reflected in the former traffic report, is there isn't a whole lot of collision data on Meridian in these intersections. Now, the presumptive reason for that is that this is state data that gets reported when there's an incident that's reported, usually through the police. And it might not capture small incidents that never get reported. But in that same vein, this is the information that we have to analyze. Now, I should touch on, there was a conversation a couple months ago about possibly trying to obtain more collision data from the public. We had advised against that for a number of reasons. I know that might be frustrating for some, but that that type of, I don't want to call it like crowdsourcing, but trying to pull that data together from residents, it's difficult to rely on information like that. And it's not really, wouldn't be standardized in the way we collect it. And it wouldn't be advisable in the city's perspective to seek out and collect data in that way, both to make decisions and also to be an owner of that data. So I know that might be frustrating for some, but that's the decision we made in terms of not utilizing that pathway to collect data from Meridian. So there isn't a whole lot here. You can see there's a number of different incidents, and we've sort of grouped it by intersection. So you can see there's like a thick black line that divides them up. And they're over the course of from 2010 on, but most of them are more recent. Leona, can you sort of shift to the right a little bit? So as we've reviewed this data like this in the past at these meetings, you can see we took the high level information, which shows you what type of collision there was and, who was involved, how many parties there were. So if you look on this column that's sort of in the center of the screen, it says vehicle involved with, and then it says first party direction. And then to the far right, it says second party direction. So what you're looking at here is if there's always a first party direction, of course, because there's somebody involved in the incident. And then if there's only one person involved, there won't be a second party. I know that what I'm saying here is obvious, but I'm just trying to help you navigate the data because you might be seeing it for the first time. And so the very far right, you can see third party, and then it goes on to fourth party and so on. But the data that we have only has either one party or two parties. And that's what you're looking at here. So for the one party and two party data, your accident types were basically side swipes, head-on collisions with fixed objects, hitting objects, rear ends. And then in this particular data set, you had one pedestrian involved incident and one bicycle involved incident. Parked vehicles, yes. So there's a couple of conclusions you can draw from this data. One conclusion, in seeing that this is the only data set that you have, when the former analysis was done, the traffic impact analysis was done in 2020, it referenced this data. And in its evaluation for stop sign warrant analysis, for example, it would use the information to determine whether there was sufficient number of incidents to warrant a stop sign. And so that was one of the conclusions of the past report because of the absence of data, the absence of number of significant collisions over a given period. That's what would promote a conclusion that a stop sign wouldn't be warranted simply because there wasn't enough. I shouldn't say enough. There weren't the sufficient number of incidents per the warrant procedure methodology. So that is sort of that conclusion is considered apart from whether or not this is a complete data set. It's the only data set that we have to make the conclusion on, if that makes sense. So in that same respect, we took a look at the MUTCD standard again, and came to the same conclusion based on the traffic data that we have for that with the, well, perhaps let me take one step back and let me go to the standard language. So I'm flipping over to page 2 of our staff report. Leanna, if you don't mind jumping around a little bit. So you'll jump up up into the document, probably about maybe 8 pages in or so. Yeah, above these, page 2 of 12. Sure. And if you can just maybe zoom in just a tad. So what we're looking at here is the language in the italics. And this is the first part of the MUTCD code. And again, a lot of you are probably familiar with this, but the whole intent of this item is to bring this information forward, to have a discussion about it. So we're just kind of going over it step by step once more. So this section of the code identifies how you would go through a multi-way stop sign analysis based on your collision data. And as I said, there wasn't enough of these crashes in a certain period to warrant that the conclusion for a stop sign installation. And so using the same amount of data that we have here, we can make that same conclusion based on those parameters. But what I want to move on to is the next part of this standard language, which starts on the bottom of that page and then continues on the next page, are the other criteria that can be considered in terms of this types of analysis. And this is what we wanted to focus on for the second part of our evaluation. And this is more of a subjective set of criteria in which you take a look at other aspects of the intersection and you make some decisions accordingly. So other optional criteria that can lead to the installation for a stop sign warrant analysis are, A, the need to control left turn vehicles, the need to control vehicle pedestrian conflicts, and so on. And so our evaluation this way was to take a look at the site geometrics of the intersections to see, what's the driver's experience in terms of approaching the intersection, and to see if there are any types of conflicts or a limiting amount of sight. So I'll jump forward and say that when we did this evaluation, and we can scroll down to, let's scroll down to the images, Liana. And let's go to the next page just to show the first one here. What you're doing in this circumstance is basically taking some of the traffic, some of the parameters of the intersection, the vehicle speed, the amount of time it takes to make the turn, and then a particular factor designated by the code. And then you're determining how much distance do you need to actually see in order to make that turn safely. And then we take a look and see if that distance is actually apparent to the driver. So we did that analysis, and we found that indeed some of the intersections do fail to meet the criteria for accurate sight distance, but there are a couple assumptions that we had to make in that evaluation. So I'll take a break here and get into that in a second, because I want to see if there's any sort of comments or questions about what we've talked about here so far.
If it's a short question.
Yeah. Very short. Was there also, I believe, a criteria about something about students and pedestrians when you've got students, when we would, for criteria?
I don't recall that there was in the code that we're referencing a specific item about students, but I would imagine it's captured under the heading of pedestrian crossing needs.
Yeah, I think it's that section
Okay.
B under the optional criteria. I think that's,
Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, I can see what you're saying. So you might make the assumption that, a high pedestrian volume would almost automatically be near a school.
Commissioner Denler?
Thank you, Chair. Ted, do you have the injury level, of those crashes, whether they were fatal injury, serious injury, other visible injury, complaint of pain, property damage?
Yeah, we
Something like-
do have that. It wasn't enough room to show it there. There's a couple other parameters, as you mentioned, like whether there was alcohol involved in the incident, whether there was injury. There was no fatal injury. I think there might have been minor injury. We can double check that. We have the information here, but there was no fatal injury. And then a couple of them did have like an alcohol incidents
Okay.
to them here.
Do
Just
you
a
remember
handful.
any serious injuries or severe injuries?
Oh, data. Hang
You
on one
don't,
second.
it's fine.
Oh, okay. No.
Okay, if there are no other questions, why don't you proceed?
Of course. So some of the considerations in doing this analysis is where exactly do you use as a set point for when you're doing your site analysis. It's common in existing intersections. Well, let me put it this way. Typically, when you're approaching a street where you're on a side street and you're entering a main street, the vehicle code designates that you drive up to the stop line. You're required to stop. And then the practical approach to enter an intersection is that you actually creep your car forward to a comfortable distance to look in both directions and before you enter the roadway. And so in that respect, that is the practical approach to addressing sight distance, is that you won't necessarily evaluate your sight distance from the stop line. You'll evaluate the sight distance from where a person would make the decision to enter the roadway. And so that's the type of approach we made here. And so it'd be a much more conservative approach to go back to the stop line, but it might not be an appropriate approach because it might be misleading in terms of how a person would enter the intersection. But even in taking our more appropriate approach, where you draw up to the intersection, we still found that a couple of the intersections didn't have the adequate sight distance necessary. And you can see this from our images, because generally the ones that are in a straightaway fashion, like here, you don't necessarily have that issue. But if you scroll down and look at some of the intersections that have, obviously a curve to them approaching or receding, you do have that sight distance issue. And so in our evaluation here, if you were to jump to, sorry to make you jump around, Liana, if you can go up to page 4, the last page of the text before the first image, top of the page there. We describe what we found here. So Bank and Meridian. So for Bank and Meridian, we found that though adequate sight distance is provided on the south side of the intersection, there's insufficient, what we would call here red curb in the report on the north side. For Rollin, we did find that there was adequate sight distance, but we have, there's another pedestrian crossing issue. We'll talk about at Rollin in just 1 second. That'll be the last part of our conversation. And then for Pine and for Beach, we found that there was inadequate sight distance based on our evaluation. And then on Maple, there was adequate sight distance because of the straightaway nature of that intersection, but there is another pedestrian crossing issue at Maple that we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. So there's multiple approaches to how we could address this, of course, as you're aware. And we haven't made those recommendations tonight. We wanted to present the information to you so we could discuss it. Certainly there's changing how parking is configured, red curbs. There's obviously control devices that you can implement. Mayor Pro Tem Primuth.
I'm sorry, Director, I'm looking at the pictures and it looks like every picture has either 267 or 239 feet. And I'm not sure how the pictures show adequate or inadequate.
Sure, I'm sorry. It's not necessarily shown on the pictures, whether they're adequate or inadequate. We were demonstrating the sight distance evaluation, and 239 feet and 276 feet are based on the 25-mile-per-hour speed limit and the 6.5 to 7.5 time gap necessary in order to make those turns on that on this type of road. We've calculated that left and right turns need a sight distance of 276 and 239 feet. So we're just showing you the information there.
You're showing what you're hoping to achieve.
Exactly, yes.
But you're not stopping short of saying, here's where the sight line stops. So we can't, it's not really cut off on those little triangle wedges.
Sure. I mean, I guess if you were to go to Exhibit E on Meridian and Beach, you would see from the aerial photograph that your sight line is obscured off of the roadway.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. We should have identified that. So it doesn't mention it explicitly, but it demonstrates it by where the lines are
Sure.
across the page there. Again, if we had more time to prepare this, we want to make sure we're staying on schedule. This is what we're trying to put together to be on time with our work plan. So those are the information that we evaluated with our sight distance geometrics. The additional information we wanted to consider in the discussion is the actual pedestrian needs at the various locations. So the initial direction from the commission was to evaluate, the initial direction from the council after last year was to evaluate the other intersections south of Meridian and Oak. But as staff worked on this item and as we had interfaced with people from the public, we also added in the intersections at the high school of Rowland and Bank because of the concerns that were brought up there. One of them was specifically at Rowland because as we learned in the last couple of months, there's a city property which is referred to as the Snake Trail that come down from the Southwest Hills. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but this comes down from the Southwest Hills and actually exits on the cul-de-sac at Rowland. And so that's a very popular route between the high school across Meridian and then up into the Southwest Hills. Similarly, there's another stairway / walkway that we also learn about is city property just south of the Maple intersection. And on the south side of that intersection across Meridian that pedestrians use also to access Bonita when they climb the stairs or go up and down those stairs. And so we found there's an additional concern about pedestrian crossing at particularly those two intersections, as well as Bank, because basically Bank is on the north side of the high school crossing. And so we've actually made a couple site visits there and witnessed students trying to cross that location. So that was a long-winded presentation, but essentially what we're getting out here is all the information that we have. We've got our SWITTers information, which is what it is. We've got our prior evaluation that is based on the traffic counts and the analysis of that SWITTers data. And then we have our site geometric information and our evaluation there, as well as our observations of what the pedestrian crossing, not counts, but anecdotal information and needs are at those couple of locations. So there are a couple solutions, general solutions to these issues, as obviously we've talked about these in terms of traffic calming and pedestrian facilities and protection, and also crossing devices. We're not taking that step yet to make those types of recommendations. We wanted to present this information to you tonight to get some feedback, maybe some clues as to things we're missing, other things we should look into, data we should collect, and then we'd like to bring this item back with a recommendation to take some sort of near-term and long-term action for these particular intersections along Meridian. Thank you for sitting through that.
Thank you very much. I guess since this is a discussion item, do we take public comment? We do? Okay. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to talk on this item? Did you fill out a card? Okay, fill it out afterwards.
Hi, yeah, I was, first of all, thanks so much for the great work behind this. I know this has been a topic for a long time in the city here. I was just wondering, there's a lot of focus in the data presented today about specific intersections, pedestrian crossings. But it seems as though, given that it sort of fulfills a bit of a dual function and that currently it's kind of feeding up to Monterey, but is also within the neighborhood. Is there a provision somehow for generally trying to reduce the speed across all of Meridian? Or are we kind of limited to really looking at specific intersections? That's it.
Thank you. And what is your name again?
Chris Miller.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comment from the public? As I recall, Director Gerber, you haven't collected speed data, correct? We know what the speed limit is. We hear there are reports of speeding, excessive speeding, but you haven't collected speed data yet, correct?
Yeah, it's my understanding that we don't have that. It's possible we do, that we're just not aware of it, but yeah, we haven't evaluated any speed data.
Okay, thank you. So, I'm going to take comments from each of the commissioners. We want to rotate. I imagine we've got a lot to say. We've got to rotate them. So Why don't we go with one question each and then we'll rotate around again. So we'll start with Commissioner Dunlap.
No questions at this time, Paris. Thank you.
That's quick. Commissioner Abel.
Can I have his time? So I have a number of comments, but just a couple of quick questions. When we reviewed this item a year ago, one of our recommendations was to extend the red zone at a few of these locations. And I believe that was done. I'm just confirming, maybe talk about whether that was done or not.
I think we did do some extensions, yes.
Okay. Because, and the other question is, there's the analysis of site distance, right? And one of the solutions that's suggested is extending red curb. So that's on top of what already was recommended and implemented some time ago, I'm guessing.
That's right, because the current site analysis, well, the site analysis that was done was based on the current configuration, so it
Right.
includes whatever was done previously. So any action to extend it would be extending it even further.
May have sounded like an obvious question. I just wanted to confirm. And last is, what other solutions are there, are you aware of to deal with site distance issues? So there's the red curb extension. I guess there's always stop. Are there other tools of which you are aware to address a site distance challenge on a street? That's just a question.
Sure. I mean, in some circumstances, you could change the right of way, but that's really not an option here because of the residential nature of the neighborhood in terms of like cutting back and things like that. The obvious one is, of course, removing parking and installing red curbs. I don't know if it's a site distance solution, but there's other configurations we could do with crosswalks, treatments that would improve pedestrian crossing safety and pedestrian crossing visibility that wouldn't necessarily improve the site visibility of the driver from the minor street, but would improve would have an indirect effect to improve the calming effect of having improvements to the pedestrian crossing that would sort of trickle down to the traffic configuration. So, there might be other solutions. This is one of the items that we're going to sort of poll with our on-call to view. I'm certainly not an expert in the area, but those are some of the conversations we've had internally with staff.
Great, thank you.
It will send Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions. I know there was concern from the community, I think even at the time, about how accurate the readings were from the 2020 statistics and numbers, because we were dealing with pandemic, we were in a different place. And whether or not the data is applicable now, and would it make sense to kind of look at the location anew? And also, do we need to consider, like you referenced, crosswalk improvements as we look at the connections to the snake trail and the stairs and those things and that flow, as things are getting more back to normal with traffic patterns and school attendance and things like that?
Sure. So we've heard that comment too. The date of the counts was in January 2020. So, we think it was safely pre-pandemic in terms of when the information was collected. I don't know what's specifically going on that day or that week, whether it was, school was off or there was a break or there was some other circumstance. We certainly have to research that to see if it was different.
I think I recall school. I don't believe the schools come back yet from winter break.
Yeah, they were back
You were back.
Yeah, and and a lot of the stay-at-home orders started in March 2020. So
Right.
if they collected
meant
data in
winter break.
January 2020, it would not have been it would have been pre-pandemic.
So, as far as data collection, we're not opposed to collecting more data. We don't know if there's value in redoing, counts. Um, you know, Chair Fisher had mentioned, collecting speed information. I think, if our goal is both, improving, the ability for cars to access from the minor to the, collector street, and improving pedestrian safety, and then also some sort of traffic calming measure along Meridian. There's certainly some additional data that we should probably collect, but we're not necessarily sure that's traffic counts per se.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a couple related questions on the collision information. Could we go to that page? Thank you. So as I read it, we have 10 years worth of reported collision data at 6 locations. And
It gets down farther, Leona, past the pictures. Yes.
it's a big report here. Thank you. Yeah, I can see it. So we have 6 different intersections or distances from intersections. We have 10 years worth of data for all that's been reported. And if I read it correctly, there are 20 reported collisions, 18 of which have been not at intersections, at mid-block locations. Can you confirm if that's correct?
Yeah, that's our impression too. I should have mentioned that in our conversation. So what we're looking at here is when we're looking at the distance column, which is about kind of center. I'm just explaining this for the public. We're looking at the reference point for each of these data points is an intersection. And it always is an intersection. But if we're looking at something that's not in an intersection, we reference the distance from that intersection. And so Chair Fisher's pointing out that the distance from an intersection is such that it's between 2 intersections.
Right, and you can also tell by the collision type if it says broadside or pedestrian, something like that. So is it, and I think looking at intersection measures is vitally important, especially where school students are involved. But would it be fair to characterize this as primarily a mid-block problem along Meridian?
I think if we were to understand the issue exclusively from the Switters data here, then yes, the conclusion would be that as far as the collision data goes, the incident rate is higher at the mid-block locations.
Okay. And just one final thing regarding collisions. At the locations where you identified inadequate corner sight distance, I think it's at Pine and Beach. Have there been any intersection collisions at those locations?
So at Meridian and Beach,
Yeah, I don't see any, correct?
so we have the 3 incidents at Meridian Beach that were, as you referenced, there's 2 side swipes and a hit object that are, 12, 21, and 66 feet south of the intersection.
Okay,
And so that's the extent of the data we have for Meridian and Beach.
okay. All right. No other comment at this time. We'll go with round 2. Vice Chair Dunlap, do you have any questions or comments?
Sure, it's a little difficult starting, but I'll try to kick us off. I think kind of going into this process and thinking through our experience last time, wanting to know what the community is supportive of. Obviously, it feels, or it seems by the public comment that we've heard today, as well as in the past, that there's opportunities to make this street safer. And I know when we went through the past round of what people were open to, there were some countermeasures that were not either supported by the community or either not supported by city staff, whether that be speed humps or those types of measures. So just kind of as we get into the solutions part, kind of and getting some more input from the residents on Meridian as to how they might envision their street. Also, I don't, if you look at the MUTCD like letter of the law, it's not going to meet those criteria. And I know that you pointed out those other factors that they can be taken into consideration with an engineering study. And I think a lot of at least my resistance previously to the multi-way stop was the engineering study and wanting that additional data. And and I think the city ultimately made the determination that justification was there and it felt comfortable with the amount of documentation, and we have the stop sign there. And I say that in case, if the feedback is that it's working well, maybe and the idea is for the city to create some sort of policy for these more neighborhood streets that provides an opportunity to implement always stops more proactively, like other jurisdictions have done, where the collision thresholds are a little bit lower. So that's just a couple of ideas and a couple of thoughts that I had as we were talking through this. Yeah, but I think I would like to know kind of what the residents are supportive of on this street. There's a lot of room, especially behind the high school, where you could do things that are really transformative. I do have some concern with the additional red curb, in that by red curbing it makes it feel wider, which makes people possibly feel more comfortable driving at a higher speed down the street. So if we widen it, if we put red curb in, it may be worth some sort of narrowing element, whether that be curb extensions or some sort of raised speed reduction measures. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Abelson.
Thank you, Chair. I thought that was a great start. So I thought if it's okay, I would just walk through the report. I made a few notes that I thought might be helpful to share. So starting on page 1, there's a bulleted list of 3 items as potential mitigating solutions mid-block. So I think the edge line striping is a fantastic suggestion, and it's sort of what I was thinking of when Vice Chair Dunlap was raising the concern about extending red curb and then increasing visually the width of the street. Edge line striping can address that by visually narrowing the street, and I know it's done successfully in cities around us. We have very little of it, and I think it makes a fantastic, tremendous difference in terms of visually narrowing and slowing cars down. So I just wanted to support that suggestion conceptually. Speed feedback signs, my experience is that they aren't terribly effective. I think people that are violating the law are violating the law, and a sign telling them that they're doing that, I think it's not terribly helpful. I think it's better than nothing, but maybe there are solutions that are more effective. The last bullet, that says BFs, but I think it's FBs. I'm guessing that's similar to the ones that are theoretically going in at certain locations around the city now, Mission Street and Fremont, I believe, right? I think that could be very helpful, particularly at Bank, where there's an existing marked school crossing. And it's a straightaway there, and people can start going at a good clip. So I think that's a great suggestion specifically for that location. Regarding the snake trail, it would seem that to have, and I don't know if there was something specifically being proposed, but I would caution us to talk about another pedestrian crossing because we have one at Bank already marked. Rollin is 1 block south, I believe. So to have another marked crosswalk across Meridian at Rollin, because that's where the snake trail is, may not make a lot of sense. And one idea is to direct pedestrians to walk 1 block north to Bank and then use the marked crosswalk, which hopefully could have some kind of visibility added to it, whether it's RRFB or something else. We did that on Fair Oaks a few years ago. There was a crosswalk that was unprotected across Fair Oaks at maybe Oxley or Linden, I can't remember. It was dangerous as all heck, and at our recommendation, it was removed. And signage was put up directing pedestrians to a marked protected crosswalk, I think 1 block to the south. So something to think about in terms of dealing with the snake trail. I like Vice Chair Dunlap's suggestion about if we're going to go this route, maybe adopting additional criteria for permitting stop signs, if that's the direction the city wants to take. I note that these optional criteria at the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3, which have been used to support always stop installations in the city, including at Oak and Milan, were not even studied by Zimmerman, and that's the report that's attached. But I think those are important criteria to consider. Looking at the 5 locations where site distance was studied, and I appreciate very much all the work that staff put into that. The location that there were a couple locations that sort of stood out to me as site distance challenges, and one is Beach, and that's noted. There's a curve to the north of that intersection at Gillette Crescent and Meridian, which introduces a challenge for viewing traffic coming southbound. And there's a suggestion to increase the red zone to increase visibility. So I support that. So that's the Beach Street recommendation. Maple Street, I think that the conclusion was the site distance was adequate. I would just be concerned because when we looked at it a year ago plus, we had suggested extending the red curb on the east side of the street, south of the intersection, to increase visibility of the traffic coming northbound on Meridian approaching that intersection, because there's an elevation. There's like this, it's straight, but there's a hill. So it's hard to see those cars until they're pretty close to the intersection. And that's a highly traveled intersection, Maple and Meridian. There's a lot of people making their way to Huntington or coming off Huntington, getting on a Meridian and going to Monterey and north. So I just want to sensitize staff to the fact that I think there is a site distance challenge for Maple Street drivers at Meridian. And I'm not saying an always stop is justified, but I'm saying that we need to look at something. Maybe it's additional red curb. I don't know. Maybe it's something else. But we have a high volume of traffic at the intersection and a lot of turns, and that hill just south. Couple more things and I'll be done. Let's see. Yes. So also within the last year, a double yellow center line was striped right down the middle of the, I'll call it the drain, in the middle of the street. And
yeah,
there
the
were some of
gutter.
us, yeah, there were some of us that cautioned against doing it. One for visibility reasons, one for longevity reasons, and just I drove it today before the meeting, and a lot of it is fading already and hard to see in places. So one thing to think about is if we're going to look at edge lining or narrowing the travel lanes, instead of the double yellow in the middle of the drain, maybe making it, and I apologize, I forgot the term, but it's a single yellow on either side of the drain. So it's not a two-way turn lane necessarily, but it's it's making the striping so it's visible and might last longer because it's not washed away by drainage. And two, it's going to narrow the street just a bit. Does that make sense what I'm describing? So
That would be a painted median. You couldn't cross it, make left turns. Right.
what if it were broken lines in the middle, or it's not wide enough to have a two-way turn lane? So you're saying if we do a yellow stripe on either side of the gutter, the drain, sorry, you cannot cross it. There's no way to allow,
If it's a solid yellow line.
so it'd have to be
Broken.
broken, dashed, hashed, something like that. Is that possible? I guess it's possible.
You could be creative.
Yes. Well, so just something to think about, because I think it was a good attempt to try to do something, but I don't think that double yellow in the middle of the street in the drain was successful. So it's just something to think about as we're working through all these. That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Hughes. And by the way, I keep forgetting to mention this, but we did receive two letters, and all commissioners received a copy of it from the public that expressed an opinion regarding Meridian Avenue. Okay, Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple easy points. I think Commissioner Abelson really covered a lot. But one of the things is if we're looking at, which was highlighted by Chair Fisher, that a lot of these collisions are taking place mid-block, if that really helps support the speeding issue, which is what we've often heard from the community. And to what Commissioner Dunlap said, looking at perhaps speeding issues, such as obviously the narrowing, but I know we looked at one point on a speed bump, speed hump policy and issue, and whether that's something that should be, considered, explored, tested, piloted, potentially for a remedy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I too would like to voice my support for the concept of edgeline striping to try to provide guidance for vehicles on Meridian Avenue, since there have been a high number of parked vehicle collisions. And I would like the idea of the center line striping. However, we must recognize that Meridian Avenue is a narrow width street and that it doesn't really accommodate adequately one lane in each direction plus park. You need 36 to 40 feet for that, and it's 34 feet wide. And then the center portion is not really available because it's gutter. So that makes it difficult. So if we put in edge lines, that means to stay away from the parked vehicle. The vehicle's going to have to go a little bit towards the center and then back again. The other thing I would like are speed feedback signs entering the area to remind through traffic that's using Meridian that this is a neighborhood they're going through. However, I would only support that if justified by data of spot speeds that show that there's speeding in the area. I would agree with Commissioner Abelson that sometimes they aren't very effective. So there would have to be some proven data showing that there is speeding for them to make the speed feedback signs, in my view, a viable option. I do like the idea of the RRFBs at school crossings. And I agree with the comment that if we're going to seriously look at having some enhance traffic controls at Bank, that we not put a crosswalk at Rollin, that we direct them to use Bank. One question that came to mind when I looked at the photos is you identify the, where was it? The little trail that comes down near Maple. And I think that's Exhibit H. It comes down near Maple. So, gee, we've got a marked crosswalk there. But the crosswalk is on the north leg and the trail comes down on the south leg. So I would think students, and correct me if I'm wrong, if someone has observed otherwise, I would think students will just make, just cross on the south leg. So I'm not sure why it's on the north leg. But I do agree that if we have a stairway coming down to an intersection, I think we have to expect that students will be crossing there. And so we would probably need some enhanced controls for that. So are there any more comments for a third round? Commissioner Dunlap.
I have one. Ted, looking at the pavement, I think it's probably structurally failed in some sections. What's the timeline for pavement resurfacing or reconstruction for Meridian? And then also, as part of that process, would there be money available? Where like these painted, I don't know, parkway, what are they, like edge lines, what are they called? I'm sorry. Where the dots currently are, to bring the sidewalk or the parkway kind of out into that area. You know what I'm saying?
You're talking about the dots that are south of Braywood.
Yeah, you had the painted edge line and then the diagonal stripes. That could obviously be parkway, right? So would there be funding as part of future road efforts to officially narrow that roadway?
So, associated with my comments earlier tonight about the different types of funding and possible reallocations, we haven't considered that specifically. We don't actually have any funding dedicated to Meridian other than number one, as you pointed out, street resurfacing, which, our schedule is a little bit unknown at this point. Of course, we have an ambitious CIP schedule to catch up over the next couple of years. And Meridian's one of the, across the city, I don't know how it compares in terms of how long it's been since it's resurfaced, but it's been many decades. And then the only funding we actually have allocated to Meridian right now, other than some operational budget money, is our CDBG funds for the ADA access ramps along some of the intersections. So, part of this process would be to identify the types of improvements we can make in addition to or in coordination with that street resurfacing funding, and then identify the funding gaps so that we can try to apply for other funds. This would probably be a really good candidate for like active transportation type funding that we could get in grant applications in this year
Yeah.
to see later funding.
Yeah, because looking at it, I think it's almost like a phase 1 and phase 2, and then phase 2 is something a bit more transformative long term. Once you resurface the pavement, because you don't need all that pavement area, right? And you could narrow the street. And I know on the high school side of the street, there's not a lot of shade when you walk along that portion. The sun hits you, so a little bit of greening through that area, I think, would be welcome also for the residents using the east side of the street. Thank you.
Commissioner Abelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of comments and a question. Just to confirm, the speed limit for the entire length of Meridian, at least the length we're talking about, which is Monterey to the city limit on the south side, it's 25. Is that right?
I don't know if it's at that whole length. Do you happen to know that? Yeah, we're pretty sure it is. We know that the areas we looked at were 25, so I think that
That's-
includes.
Those, that's
yeah.
the signage I've seen. I just wanted to confirm it. To rule out that the discussion of speed limit reduction is a non-starter because we're already at 25 as opposed to.
Sure,
31,
yeah, it's whether people are following that speed.
Right, well,
really.
that's
Yeah,
another conversation.
yeah.
And then just quickly on the speed feedback. I think Chair Fisher and I are thinking similarly in that regard. The only time I've noticed that speed feedback makes a meaningful difference is when it's backed up by enforcement. And that's difficult to come by. So just something to think about. I'm glad Vice Chair Dunlap brought up the bot stots, RPMs, whatever you want to call them, that were put in also within the last year. That Braywood curve north of Oak. That the visual narrowing of the street and the dots, I think it definitely helps manage the traffic through that section and control the speed. So it seemed to me that was a nice test to see what could be done both north and south. North of where the edge striping was put in, the street is quite wide immediately north. So that might be another opportunity to try to bring some of it in visually. Maple. So I agree with Chair Fisher's comments, and I wanted to add that I don't like where the crosswalk is right now, or among other reasons, in addition to what Chair Fisher said, that's where all the turns are, right? People are coming off Huntington onto Maple and turning right to go up Meridian, or they're going down Meridian and then they're turning left onto Maple. And that intersection is right there. And an intersection that I use on a daily basis is Mission at Grand, for obvious reasons. And what I thought is so smart about the way it's designed, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, is that the crosswalk is on the west side of the intersection. And most of the moves for people coming off Grand is to the left to go east on Mission, and there's no marked crosswalk there. And so there's the potential for conflict is much less. So I think if we can relocate that crosswalk to the southern section, as Chair Fisher suggested, that might help improve safety and potential for conflict as well with heads and cars. That's it. Thanks.
All right, Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just also echoing the thought of changing that intersection and moving it might be a big improvement. To help with any conflict.
Which intersection was that one?
Yeah, the crosswalk.
Oh, the crosswalk. So,
At Maple.
okay.
Okay. So I wanted to get clarity on this at the two locations you identified, Pine and Beach, where there's an adequate sight distance. Would extending the red curb to prohibit parking near the intersection give you the adequate sight distance?
I think at Beach, we made that conclusion. At Pine, I don't know that we confirmed that yet.
Okay. Because the reason why I ask is we haven't had an accident there in 10 years. And, not saying how many, do you want to wait for an accident, but we haven't had one in 10 years. So I just want to make sure if we're going to actively consider stop sign control, that we're not putting in a solution that then is worse than the existing condition. So I would hope you'd be able to look at that. And then regarding the spot speeds, you've collected a lot of data. I appreciate the analysis you've gone through. I think we owe it to the community to know if there is indeed speeding. I'd like to make sure that we get some speed data, maybe mid-block between Pine and Maple, or at two locations, just to to be informed by that. And then another thing is, as we look for appropriate measures, I hope we don't overlook the enforcement side of things, because there's some things that traffic control devices cannot address. And I thought your table of the collisions was helpful. I'm wondering if we could delete a couple of columns and maybe add another column on DUI. Or maybe there's another one regarding
Sure,
incapacitation of the driver or other factors or something, but to put that information on there to see if intoxicated drivers are the factor at only one or two of the collisions or several of them.
Sure, we have that information, just wasn't included, but there was two on the bank were alcohol related, one on the Maple, one on the Oak, and one on the Rowland,
Okay.
as far as this data goes. But to Commissioner Dunlap and your comments, Chair Fisher, we can always add additional information about that as well as injury information.
Okay, so with the on-call contracts that are going to be approved shortly, would you have the ability to collect some speed data?
Absolutely, and that's one of the intentions we have with this on-call contract was to actually hire multiple transportation firms to work on multiple projects simultaneously.
Okay, here you
So we
take
can-
this, you take.
Exactly,
Okay,
exactly.
sounds good. And would you have the in-house capability with your with the staffing you're putting on board and the staffing you're promoting to look at the site distance and see if you extended red curb, would that bring it in compliance?
Yeah, we could, we could do that either with our on-call or with our in-house staff. So it just matters how we want to divvy up those resources.
Okay, so what I'm hoping to do, subject to what the commission wants to do, is to bring this item back after we have the additional information. And then I think once we're fully informed, we'd be in a position to look at some recommendations for Meridian Avenue. So what do the commissioners think?
I support that.
Okay,
I support that.
Commissioner Hughes, okay. So could you then bring forward the information maybe in about 2 months, 3 months? How long would you need?
Yeah, that would be our expectation. We have, I think our schedule is, we're supposed to be looking at the Slow Streets new program after we have the mission business feedback and the finalized scope next month. And then I think we're supposed to talk about measure our projects in September. So yeah, I think September might be a good, or October might be a good timeline, depend on those other items to bring back some more
Okay.
information here.
So the additional information that the commission would be looking for, and tell me if I've missed anything, is to add a column and delete other columns from the collision data that would show any unusual factors such as inebriation, drugs, hit and run, whatever.
Of course.
And to bring back the speed information and to bring back some enhanced information on sight distance using additional red curb. Is there any other information the commissioners would like to see?
Should we invite staff to provide some recommendations, solutions at that time as well, that we can consider and
Of course.
Before we consider the information?
throwing it out there, or as part of it?
Well, we could certainly take a look at, once we have some assistance on this item, we're certain to have some suggestions. We don't have to, we could see what the information yields and go from there in terms of whether recommendations are appropriate at the time.
Or even, are there other available solutions other than the
Mhm.
ones we've discussed, just so we sort of have the toolbox in front of us?
Sure, of course. Yeah, we don't want to just put it completely on you to give us a solution. We want to have some sort of guidance for that.
Yeah.
Quick question. Also, if we could have some indication, like to Commissioner Dunlap's point about, we need to do it in a priority based on what funding we have? Like, here's what we can cover with this funding. Here's what we can cover with that funding. And then we'll be able to prioritize potentially, because if we don't have the funding now, which is what I understood, correct? That we would need to say, where can we get this funding? Is it coming out of the resurfacing? Can we do, I'm making this up, we determine we want to move the crosswalk and do that. Maybe that's one element we decide to do. And how can we cover the cost of that? So I'm just saying, it'd be great to look at it all, but if we can't execute it,
Yeah, I was hoping that we could handle this item this calendar year with some recommendations, which would mean short term, which would mean, conventional traffic control devices. But I think there could be a good discussion about more long-term measures, but they'd have to be implemented at some future date with some future funding.
Sure, I mean, we can take a shot at a funding plan. The productive thing about this whole conversation is having done all this evaluation, and of course, this public component really sets us up perfectly to apply for funding. Once all that is done, it's really sort of the key to getting funding is demonstrating you've done all your homework there. So we can certainly put forth some sort of high level funding plan of what we could afford with our current funding versus what we would go after to implement some more of this work.
So would it be feasible to bring this back for the October agenda? In other words, would you have the speed data? Would you have the advice of your consultant as to other things that might be looked at, or the feasibility of some of the things we're considering now?
Yeah, I think that's fair timeline.
Okay, so I'd like to bring this back for the October agenda and then agendize for the November agenda recommended action. Does that meet with the commission's approval?
So you want to do it in two phases or two?
Yeah, I'm in no rush to a bunch of recommendations. But I'd like to really get all the information and consider it. All
Sure.
right, so that'll be what we'll do then for the October meeting. So with that, we'll conclude this item, and I want to thank staff for looking at the items in detail. And, we're really starting to look at objective data to help us come to important decisions regarding traffic control. So appreciate the effort you all put into it.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, we'll look at our action item, which is the approval of the minutes. Commissioner Hughes always reviews the minutes and edits them. She does a great job of that. I take a look at it. Maybe I change a sentence or two. And then we present it to the commission here. Are there any edits to the minutes?
I have a question and a couple of
Yes.
edits.
Yes.
Let's see, section 2, information reports, project status update, second paragraph. I'm trying to understand what says the Orange Grove and 110 freeway connection area needs to be reviewed in regards to the streetlights. And it says Chair Fisher suggested that the interspacing of streetlight types, so more light is provided that could help drivers in negotiating the curve. I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah,
So I was just wondering if there's-
Two types of lights, the large overhead that was down and then the more traditional. So that more light would be visible as vehicles navigated the curve, which was his recommendation. That
Oh, okay.
one of the mitigation things.
so there'd be
help.
the ornamental and then the ones that really work.
Okay. All right. And this reflects what you recommended or suggested, your comments.
Yes.
Okay.
We might have reworded it.
Yeah.
It reflects the.
Okay, great. Two paragraphs down, the Mission Street and Fremont Avenue, I would switch efforts with RRFB projects, if everybody agrees. And then the rest of it's fine. So the Mission Street and Fremont Avenue RRFB projects will be out for bid. Et cetera. Okay. Next paragraph, regarding improvements at Columbia and Orange Grove, the neighbors will, I would say, remove the need to. The neighbors will be advised of improvements, and period. Then Commissioner Abelson recommended, and then pick it up, edge striping on, and then instead of all, both sides.
I'm sorry, where's the edge striping?
So regarding improvements at Columbia and Orange Grove, comma, the neighbors will be advised of improvements, period.
Oh,
Commissioner Abelson recommended edge striping on both sides of Columbia. It's just clarification more than anything else. And then this is also clarification. Two more down. The commission urged that the new loading zone concept, and then just add on Fremont Avenue, so it's clear where we're talking about. And then the rest of it's fine. And then just one last thing. Item 8, Commissioner Communications. Last sentence, Commissioner Hughes suggested to apply mulch to the area to retain moisture and improve the aesthetics. I think that was part of your message. Yeah. So just add and improve the aesthetics to the end of that paragraph. That was it. Other than that, thought it was great. Thank you.
thank you. We have a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved. Oh. I'll second.
Okay. Moved by Commissioner Hughes, seconded by Commissioner Abelson. All those who approve, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you. Now we go to communications from our city council liaison.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for your time and effort and focus and expertise on Meridian Avenue. This is really part 2 of the discussion that was given to you as part of the Meridian Oak intersection, and that included looking at anything else that needs to be done. And I'm really glad that both staff and the commission are focusing on this. The council has a very large agenda for tomorrow night. We have our closed session starting at 4 p.m. and then we expect to have a very, very full open session agenda as well. One of the items that Director Gerber mentioned is a sort of a pre-approved contract source platform where the city will be able to, I think, put itself on a more higher capacity footing in terms of getting contractors on board and getting projects done. That's I love the concept. We're gonna have to vet that and look at it carefully. Tomorrow night might be the night, or we might create a special meeting just for that concept. Also on the agenda is electrification of City Hall. So there's projects, ideas on that. There's also a leasing proposal for police vehicles in which there would be a lease. The city would enter into a lease to start converting our gas-powered public safety fleet to electric. So that'll be an interesting discussion. There are a number of other interesting proposals. The library parcel tax will be also up for the city council to place on the ballot. I'm trying to think, is there anything else that's well, you said you had 4 public works items. Oh yes, so Hawthorne Street, it somehow acquired the nickname of Railway Alley. And so it needs to go back to Hawthorne Street because that's really the homeowners on that street deserve their proper due being part of Hawthorne Street. And then we do have crossing guard, a discussion item on a crossing guard at at Huntington and Marengo, which I think is an interesting proposal. And then, oh, that's right. That's right. So, having moved all public works to Garfield Reservoir, we're finally buying them computers. So, although I think it's not as bad as that, but really we are trying to upgrade that infrastructure. So Ted has a professional office with fully equipped workstations to work from. So that's public works related stuff. And then there, no doubt, are other items I haven't mentioned. If you have any questions, I can answer them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Fisher. Not to add any items to council's to-do list as well as like city staff's to-do list, but one item that, you know, the city might want to at least look into is development of some sort of local road safety plan or the safe system plan or Vision Zero plan. I think you'll see that coming up as a requirement for a lot of funding, whether that be HSIP funding or the BIL funding under the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. If you go for an implementation grant, you're required to have some sort of local road safety plan, as well as the setting speed limits, the Assembly Bill 43 and the provisions for which you can reduce speed limits. Certain provisions require development of a high injury network or locations that experience higher rates of fatal or severe injury crashes. So we can certainly talk with that offline at some point if you haven't already been thinking about that. But it might be something that might be required, especially as Metro. I think they are kind of launching their own safety goals. So I'd imagine if they're giving funding, they want to make sure that the local jurisdictions, policies, and priorities are also kind of in line with safety. But thank you.
Commissioner Abels.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. First, I think the high school might be starting even earlier. I know that's not what you want to hear, Ted. I think it might be starting as early as August 11th this year. So you could just keep that in mind as you move forward with the project we discussed earlier on Fremont. You can only do what you could do, but I just wanted to let you have that info. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. And then the other thing I just want to mention quickly is the work that went into preparing the documents for tonight is exceptional and very much appreciated. And all I would ask is that if we're getting to the point where it looks like staff can't get the information out to us by the Thursday before the meeting and the public, that if there's some advance awareness of that, and maybe staff can talk with the chair or whatever, and may think about, does it make sense to, I know it's very difficult scheduling wise, to postpone the meeting, or so that we have enough time to review it and think about it, and public has the time to access it and consider it and maybe provide feedback or come to the meeting with information. And I know we're coming back in a few months with more on this. It's not the be all end all tonight, but just if you could keep it in mind, and I know you're stressed and strained, and hopefully with additional staff, it's going to be less of an issue. But me personally, I'd rather either skip a meeting or have a meeting later than originally scheduled if it means having the information, having more time to digest it. Just something to keep in mind. But the work you did is great, and I really appreciate it. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of want to echo also what Commissioner Abel said. It would be nice to have a little more time to be able to go through the information, particularly something like this where the community was so involved, has been so involved. And the other thing is, I know we want to do this right. We want to come back in October and have all the data, but I also want to kind of remember that we've been working with this community, the Meridian, the smart families of Meridian since 2017, 18, 19, they were helping with timing, looking at the study and all of that. So we don't want to, we want to do things right, but if we could get them done timely and know that we are making progress for these critical arteries that we have in the city as the region changes and as we, say goodbye to the 710 extension and we look at the region in a new light. The other is, if we could look at Caltrans and talk to them, there are some real big potholes right before the exit coming onto Orange Grove, exiting and going into South Pasadena. And I just worry that we're going to end up having, we end up with backup there often anyway. And I worry that we're going to have somebody, trying to get off and hit it and have a major accident there. 'Cause we've had a number of accidents there anyway. And I worry that either trying to avoid the pothole, hit the potholes, and that should really be it's Caltrans. They need to deal with that. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
And also thank you, Ted.
And I wanted to echo what's Commissioner Abelson said. It is desirable to have the weekend to read the report and think about it on kind of more leisurely. That's the idea what we should do, but I do appreciate the fact that you worked over the weekend and you put a lot of extra time into it. So I appreciate the thoroughness of the report, and I'll work with you and we'll try to make sure that we can get these out in time. With that, I don't have any more comments. Do you have any staff communications?
Just very quick so we can keep with our timely goal here. So your comments about timing is very well received. We're at a very interesting intersection where we're expending effort to recruit, expending effort to bring on the on-call services, to start the new year, to keep us on schedule. And then we also have a very challenging council schedule where, as Mayor Pro Tem Primuth had mentioned, that we were trying to basically get a whole bunch of items through the council at the same time. So yeah, the scheduling is difficult. If we have had this happen with other commissions where we basically may cancel a meeting and then that usually means we have to go online for a special meeting because this room is basically just booked. So if you're open to that, we could do that in the future, but our goal would be to avoid that and try to stay on schedule, the work plan and get you the items well in advance for the public as well. So we'll work on that. Just one other item. We did look into the comment last time about the South Pasadena sign. The mulching actually turned out not to be a feasible alternative because the sign is so steep that it would actually just sort of roll down. I guess it's been tried before. So we're looking into some other ground cover solution for that. The boat might hopefully come up with that. So that's all we had. Thank you so much.
Right, with that, I think we've concluded our meeting. And so I'd like to adjourn right at 8:30. So we're under 2 hours today.
Well done, Mr. Chair. Congratulations.
Well done. You guys. All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.